We're looking at the book of Ruth today. I'm very grateful it's only 4 chapters and not 10 like Esther was. To find Ruth, you'll get through the first 5 chapters, you'll then get to Joshua's, Judges, Ruth. If you're driving too fast, you will run right past her. It's a short little book, okay? But we're gonna work our way through these. You can go back home and read it for yourself, hopefully later today. You ever had to worship at night? You ever had to worship in the dark? And I'm not talking about middle of the night, dark. I'm talking being in a foreign land, dark. Bible talks about a foreign land from time to time. You and I may know a foreign land as being in a job that you didn't really want. Being in a marriage that's more difficult than you thought it would be. Relationships with some of your family or children or however it may work that are harder or maybe broken, and it's not the way you saw it in your mind's eye. And yet, we're still commanded to worship, aren't we? And I would say that when we find ourselves in this foreign land environment where life isn't as we expected, we can still worship Him in the dark. Oftentimes, we think about worshiping Him when life is good. That's when it's easiest, right? When life is really simple and good and seems somewhat to be working according to our plan and our purposes, it's easy to say, how great is our God. But it's those other times when life isn't good that maybe is harder to lift His name and worship the only one that matters. And I'll submit to you this morning that if we only worship Him when life is good, when life turns bad, you'll stop worshiping. And here's my thesis for you today. We don't worship God because He's good or because life is good. We worship God because He is good. Does that make sense? If I only worship when life is good, I'm going to struggle. But I can always worship when He is good because there's never a time when He's not. Therefore, we don't worship just because of the ease of our life. We worship because of the sustenance of our faith, because of the strength of our Savior. And I want you to remember that. Because if you remember that you can worship Him because He's always good, you'll worship Him in the night. You'll worship Him when it's dark. It's kind of where we find ourselves in the book of Ruth. You notice the book that we're studying is called Ruth, and yet we're looking at the lady called Naomi. And Naomi is the mother-in-law in this particular story. I've nicknamed this book or titled the message, Naomi, the bitter and the blessed. And yes, she's both. She has a hard, bitter spirit to her. But you'll also find where she becomes, I'll just put it this way. She learns how to worship in the dark. And I hope that we can learn from her today. I hope that this book will help some of us who are wondering where God is when tragedy after tragedy and hurt after hurt piles up on your life and you go, where is God? Maybe the book of Ruth will help you in that experience. Maybe it's for some of us in the room wondering, is integrity really worth it? Does living my life with integrity really matter at the end game? And maybe Ruth will help you answer that question today. And maybe for some of us who seem to think we just live ordinary lives of faith. See, some of you in the room, and I know this because I'm in the same boat so often, we tend to think our faith is simply ordinary. There's nothing special about it. I was going through some of the books in my library this week, and I came across a book by one of my pastors called Building Dynamic Faith. I thought, well, I put that aside. That's not me today. I came across another book who was a professor of mine, and he's talking about courageous faith. I'm thinking I'll just write a book called Ordinary Faith, Weak Faith, Limited Faith, because I know that book. Anybody else in the room? But I don't want you to forget that God uses ordinary faith to do extraordinary things. And we may learn that today from the book of Ruth. When you get to chapter 1, verse 1, and I'm not going to have time to go with you verse by verse through this, but we'll set up some big passages or bigger thoughts as we go. Verse 1 tells us that the writing of Ruth, the time period we're looking at, is in the period of the Judges. This is 400 years that's taken place from the time the children of Israel move into the promised land until the time that God gives them a king. And there's 400 years here where there were just the judges are the ones who kind of ruled the day. That's the period of Ruth. The sad part about it, we read in Judges 21:25, it says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And I got to be honest, as I read that last part of Judges 21:25, I think so much of our culture and our world today where everyone seems to do what is right in their own eyes. They seem to do what we want to do and forget everything else. This was a very dark time. When you get to Ruth 1:1, it's a dark time in the lives of the Jews, in the life of Naomi, and the situation we find ourselves. I told you last week, God may be silent, but He's never absent. That same theme will thread over into the book of Ruth as we look at it today. If you want to take some notes and follow along with me, I'll give you 3 big hooks as we move through the passage. The first one is simple. Light overwhelms darkness. Light overwhelms darkness. That's not a hard concept. That's nothing new. You said I could have sat at home and heard that. Well, you couldn't, okay? Light overwhelms darkness, and that's good news. You and I want that because remember, there are days that we have to know how to worship in the dark. And when we're worshiping in the dark, I want to know that the God of all light knows how to overwhelm the darkness of my heart and my life at various times. Anybody else in the room? Let me show you how this unfolds, that light overwhelms darkness. And again, we're going to focus primarily on the life of Naomi, although the other, the characters of the story, people in the story will come into play here. But rather than starting in the first verses of chapter 1, I want to take you towards the end. Because verses 20 through 21 seem to be Naomi's anthem, so to speak. If you'll look at with me in Ruth 1, verse 20, she, that's Naomi, said to them, this is the people of Bethlehem. I'll clue you in on this in just a minute, but she's talking to her neighbors and says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought great calamity upon me? Boy, what depressing verses, right? You're going to go, Naomi, is it really that bad? You ever ask somebody, how you doing? And then they begin to tell you and you regret asking the question? Naomi's coming back into her village and they go, oh, look, it's Naomi. And she goes, don't even call me Naomi. Naomi means sweet and pleasant. Call me Mara. That means bitterness. And can't you just picture her? Just very curmudgeonly. Don't speak nice to me. I went away full. I've come back here empty. And she says, the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I think she's in the dark. And I don't think she knows how to worship in the dark. What in the world got us to this point? Well, if you're taking notes, you can write down that there's Naomi's despair. Naomi's despair. And to understand the fullness of her despair, we can backtrack into chapter 1. In verse 2, there's a famine that comes into the land to where her husband Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, her 2 sons, all lived. Now, I really happen to like the name Elimelech. What a fun name to say. And I told the first service, in my junior high youth, every time I hear Elimelech, I think of the song from The Lion King. You're welcome. It will now be stuck in your head the rest of the day. Randy's singing it. It fits, doesn't it? Elimelech, Elimelech. You see, there you go. That's all I got, folks. Verse 2, the famine hits the land. Elimelech, Naomi, their 2 sons, there's no food in the land. And they know this according to the Levitical passage that says anytime there's a famine in the land, that will always be God's hand against the people of Israel. So they know that God is bringing some sort of judgment. And Elimelech decides this: we'll starve if we stay here. Let's go over to the land of Moab. Now, the Lord had told the people of Israel, don't go to the land of Moab. But Elimelech, his 2 sons and his wife, go anyway. And they set up home there. They didn't just go to pass through. They set up home, so much so that the 2 boys married 2 Moabite girls. Now, you'll see that in the story, by the time you get to chapter 3, verse 3, Elimelech dies. And then the 2 sons die. So now you've got Naomi. Now, are you understanding verse 20 and 21? The Lord has dealt bitterly with me. There's not only a famine that chased her out of her land, but there's judgment of God because her 2 sons and her husband are now dead. And then there's this overwhelming grief. I mean, properly so. Everything she had, everyone she knows is gone. She has 2 daughter-in-laws who appear to be barren and have produced no grandchildren. Therefore, by Jewish law, she's one of those that would fall through the cracks. Because without a husband or without children, that's kind of the safety net of the day, she's easily forgotten, she's easily cast aside, and could lose everything she has. So she goes in this great despair of verses 20 through 21. It's because there was a famine that chased her from her homeland, and then there was a judgment of God upon their family, and she lost her husband and her 2 sons, and then there's this overwhelming grief. Just tragedy upon tragedy and hurt upon hurt. I understand Naomi's despair, don't you? You start to listen to this and go, you know what? I think what you said in verses 20 through 21 sound legitimate. I understand why you're saying God has dealt bitterly with me. But she catches wind that while she's in Moab, that the famine has passed in Bethlehem. And she goes, I have nobody here. I might as well go back home. She packs it up. She's getting ready to leave. And her 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, decide to go along with her. And there's an exchange that happens really in verses 8 through 15. That's a longer passage. But if you'll tighten it up with me for just a second and look at verses 11 through 13. Naomi is talking to her 2 daughter-in-laws who are trying to go back to Bethlehem. And it says, but Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I any sons left in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and bear 2 sons, would you therefore wait until they're grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. What's she saying? They're trying to make the trip home with her, and she goes, stay here. I'm too old to get married. If I did get married, I'm too old to have a baby. If I did have a baby, are you two really going to wait around until that baby is fully grown and old enough to marry and then marry him? You're better off to stay in the land of Moab. You're better off to stay right here. And then, this is interesting what she's saying. Not just stay in the land of Moab, but for Naomi to say that, she's saying stay in the place where false teaching is. Stay in a place where they don't worship the true God. She thought it was better for them to stay in idol worship than to follow her back to Bethlehem because she felt like the God that she serves has dealt so bitterly with her. I think she's in great despair, don't you? She needs counseling. She needs help. She needs someone who will come along beside her. And this whole idea that she's unpacking here about, if I were to get a husband and then I were to have a baby and you wait this long, there's a Jewish principle here about the kinsman redeemer. And it works this way, that if the husband were to die, the widow needs to be cared for. And if the husband and wife have no children, it leaves the widow at greater risk. Therefore, what would happen is a family member of the husband who died would marry the widow. They would have children so they could continue the heritage or the legacy, the inheritance for that family. Because if there wasn't a heritage and a legacy, then there was no inheritance. So this is a big deal. If we're left without help and hope, then despair always slips in. So God provides this way of a redeemer. But here's the problem. Naomi has forgotten that she has a kinsman redeemer. She's been out of the land of Bethlehem for a number of years, at least 10 years, and she has forgotten who all of her relatives are. So she's telling Ruth and Orpah, just stay here. Worship your false idols because that will be better for you than going back to the land of where I'm coming from and worshiping a God you don't know and living with people you don't know in a culture that you don't know and a language that you don't understand. And as she makes her plea for this, Orpah goes, I think you're right. She turns around and goes back. But Ruth has a different heart. And remember when I said light overwhelms darkness? The darkness of the passage is Naomi's despair. But the light begins to show up in Ruth's faithfulness. Write that down. Ruth's faithfulness. Because I want you to see this. It's probably the most famous passage out of the book of Ruth. It says over in verse 16 and 17, Ruth says this, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge, and your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death departs me from you. When Naomi said that saw that she was determined to go with her, she said, no more. I love Ruth's faithfulness here. Now remember, she's a Moabite girl. She's grown up under idol worship. But for somehow, in the 10 years that she's been married to one of Naomi's boys, she saw Naomi's God. And she anchors herself not only to the heart of Naomi, but to the God of Naomi. Now, I don't know if I always think that's so good, right? Don't you love that passage? Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Stop for a moment. Do you remember the perspective that Naomi has of her God? He's abandoned me. He's dealt bitterly with me. He's sent me away full. He's brought me back empty. This is Naomi's viewpoint, and yet Ruth goes, where you go, I'll go. Your people, my people. Your God, my God. That's a tremendous step of faith. Wouldn't you agree? I love this. I love that Ruth shows up in great faithfulness. It meant leaving your own family. It meant living as a widow for the rest of her life. It meant living without children the rest of her life. It meant meeting new people and learning new customs and figuring out a new language. It meant moving to Bethlehem and making that her home. And it meant making Naomi's God her God. Light shows up a different way. Now, are you tracking with me? Light overwhelms darkness. Truth? Naomi's living in a very dark state in her life. Despair and emptiness. Brokenness and hopelessness. Ruth comes along beside her and goes, boy, that friend that sticks closer than a brother, I got you. Anybody need an I got you friend? They'll walk in and hug and not have to say anything. Man, we need Ruths in our life. But I'll tell you someone else that shows up in the story. You're going to see the godliness of a man named Boaz. And Boaz, he's kind of our hero. He is the kinsman redeemer that Ruth and Naomi so desperately needed. You'll see in just a glimpse of him in verse 1 of chapter 2 that he's a very wealthy man. He owns all kinds of fields. You'll find in verse 4 of chapter 2 that he's a man of God. He really is a godly man. But it shows up best when you read verses 10 through 13. And again, you'll have to go back and catch some greater context. But to set it up for you briefly, Ruth and Naomi are back in Bethlehem. They've got to eat. So Ruth goes out in the day and she goes to the fields where they are harvesting grain. Now, she doesn't become one of the harvesters. She follows along behind them and just picks up the scraps as they go. Well, she spends the day working this one particular field, and it just happens to be the field that Boaz loans. Like it just happened, right? I believe God works in the dark. Matter of fact, catch this. Our God works the night shift. If we can worship Him in the dark, I want you to learn that God works the night shift. And here's Ruth walking along behind these people, picking up the scraps off the field. Boaz looks out and he sees this beautiful young lady working the fields, following along. And I don't know it for sure, but the way I understand his response in Hebrew to Ruth working the field when he saw this beautiful girl out there was, ooh la la. He was captivated by her. So he shows her great kindness, because in chapter 2, verses 10 through 13, Ruth says that she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner?" And Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you left your father and your mother and your native land, and you came to people that you did not know. The Lord repay you for what you have done. A full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." I love that. You know what I have written in my Bible? God works the night shift. When she thought there was no redeemer, when she thought there was no help and no hope, and she stumbles upon a field, it just happens to be that she didn't know it, and Naomi had forgot about it, but it happens to be a close family relative. Matter of fact, close enough to be in line to fulfill the role of the kinsman redeemer, which means he could marry Ruth, they could have children, and the inheritance of Naomi would be secured. God works the night shift. I'll tell you how else he does this. Light overwhelms darkness when God's kindness shows up. Now I want you to see something. Naomi was in great despair, and God sends Ruth's faithfulness her way. Then he sends the godliness of Boaz past her. And then God gets closer when he shows up in kindness. Because in chapter 2, verse 20, this is Naomi speaking now. This is really an amazing passage of Scripture. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "This man is a close relative of one of our redeemers." That's our guy. That's our guy. I went away full, I've come back empty, and I've come back empty, she says in chapter 1, because I don't have anybody. God's not provided anybody. There's no one to bring rescue. And by the time you get to the end of chapter 2, Naomi goes, Boaz. Why didn't I think of him? I forgot that we have a Boaz. She forgot that she had a Redeemer. Sometimes in the dark we forget that we have a Redeemer. But God does his best work at the dark sometimes. And here's what I love that happens here. In chapter 1, verse 6, God stops the famine. She goes back. In verses 6 through 17, the Lord bonds the life of Ruth to Naomi. In chapter 2, he presents Boaz as the Redeemer who can rescue Ruth and help her through the time and get her to a place where she finds food and shelter. And then it's amazing at the end of chapter 2. It's God himself who breaks through Naomi's despair and brings her hope. Because everything you read in chapter 1, verses 20 through 21, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. He took me away full. He brought me back empty. Changes by chapter 2, verse 20. Compare them. Because of the Lord's kindness, he has brought to us a Redeemer. For the first time in all of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2, Naomi has hope. You know why she has hope? Because life or light always overpowers darkness. Now here's what I love about chapter 3. It's a crazy chapter. Can I just tell you right? It's a crazy chapter. But you want to write this in as a point. It'll help you a little bit. For the first time in our book that we're studying, Naomi has hope, and hope gives a strategy. Hope has a strategy. Now, I'm not sure she had the best strategy. She finds out that Boaz has an interest in Ruth. Ruth has an interest in Boaz. Boaz is in position to be the Redeemer who could marry Ruth and restore the inheritance. Are you with me so far? So she decides the Lord needs assistance. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you?" Here's the translation. I need to find you a husband. Verse 2. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? She was working in the field. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now verse 3. Go wash, anoint yourself, put on your cloak or your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor, and do not make yourself known to Boaz until he has finished eating and drinking. Now when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Crazy. Verse 5. Ruth replied, all that you say, I will do. Here's the strategy. Naomi decides she's got to get a husband for Ruth. She says, Ruth, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go in and get cleaned up. Hair, makeup, perfume. I told the first service, my dad always called it, put on that come hither, stay closer stuff. Make yourself look good and smell good. Go down to the threshing floor where Boaz is. Now he's there, he's working. When he's done working, he's going to eat, he's going to get something to drink, and he's going to go to bed. And you need to go down and you need to hide so he doesn't see you. But when he goes to bed, I want you to slip into the place where he is sleeping, go in, lay down at his feet, pull the cover back from where that's covering his feet, and leave it like that. If I'm Ruth, I'm going, this is your best plan? You really are in despair. This is what you've come up with. And yet Ruth and her faith remember, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And she says, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. Now, I don't have time to go through the whole story, but it's an absolute beautiful story. She goes down and does that. She does exactly what Naomi says. Boaz wakes up when his feet gets uncovered, looks down and finds a girl, matter of fact, the one that he thinks is so beautiful, laying at his feet. And he says, what do you want me to do? And she says, cover me with your wings. Now, that's an important Old Testament term. Bring me under your shelter. I'll tell you what exactly meant. Marry me. She's proposing. She says, I'm here. I need a husband. You're available. Why don't you be my husband? She tells the story that she needs a kinsman redeemer. He now knows that he is in position to be the redeemer, and he says, I will do for you everything that you have asked. And it brings Ruth and Naomi under the wings of the kinsman redeemer, which secures their inheritance. What a beautiful story. Naomi would have never come up with that idea and that plan and that strategy had there not been hope in chapter 2. Hope gives a strategy, and it brings expectations. It moves people from being victims. Because here's the reality. People who have no hope have no strategy. If you and I always live as the victim, we will never live as the conqueror. The goal of the whole passage in chapter 3 was to find Ruth a godly husband. The strategy was for Ruth to do exactly what Naomi said. And it worked. It worked. I'm almost done. Chapter 1. I went away full. I came back empty. And the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. If that's your chapter today, I want to help you move. Chapter 2 gets filled with hope because at long last, there appears a redeemer, a husband for Ruth. Chapter 3 is a bold step of faith, isn't it? I mean, those actions of Ruth could have gotten her in all kinds of trouble. And she makes the bold statement, spread your wings over me and let me become your wife and you become my husband. Sadly, in the last part of chapter 3, the first part of chapter 4, there's a setback. Boaz likes Ruth. Ruth likes him. They decide that this is the right thing and that he's in the right position to be the redeemer. And then they realize there's another relative who's closer, who's in the seat right in front of Boaz, who could redeem Ruth and Naomi. Boaz is so smart and so godly. He goes to the city gate where all the business took place. He finds the relative and he says, did you know the story of Ruth and Boaz? He said, yes, I do. You know they need a redeemer? He said, yes, I do. He said, do you want to be that redeemer? And this guy says, yeah, I'll do it. But Boaz holds back a little bit from him, which is so smart. The guy says, yeah, you know, if I need to marry her so the inheritance can go on, that's no problem. I'll do that. Strange culture. I get it. And then Boaz goes, oh, by the way, it appears that Ruth is barren because she was married for 10 years and had no kids. Well, as soon as this other guy finds out that she's barren or potentially barren and can't have children, he goes, you know what? I'm not your guy. Why don't you go ahead and be the redeemer? Boaz goes, perfect. This was my plan all along. This is what I was hoping that God would do. And the story continues. And by the time you get to chapter 4, you'll see that Ruth and Boaz get married. You'll see that they have a child. And the story ends in this wonderful picture that I want to spend the rest of our time with, which is only a few moments. But maybe to help set it up, I give you this final reminder. Image bearers of God are meant to live for magnificent causes. You and I are image bearers of God. And we have been designed by the Almighty to live for a magnificent cause. And let me see if I can help you understand what I mean by this. When you get to Ruth chapter 4, look at verse 13 through 17 with me. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap, and she became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. There's several fun things in this story, isn't there? Naomi thought that her life was in despair in chapter 1, only to find out in chapter 4 that God had planned a magnificent work for her to be a part of. Now, I got to be honest with you. I read this passage of Scripture, and it says that the women in verse 17, they gave him a name and said, A son has been born to Naomi. Does that find anybody else interesting? I'm leaving this afternoon, Sue and I, to go over and visit our brand new grandbaby. And I can promise you this. When we get into the house and Sue is holding Callan and my daughter-in-law is within earshot, I'm not going to say to Sue, Callan has been born to you. I'll get shot. Why would she say a child has been born to Naomi? Well, one, born to Naomi means secured her inheritance. It's part of the line. But I think it's greater than that. It dispels everything that she said about God in chapter 1, verse 20 and 21. That the Lord sent me away full and has brought me back empty. By chapter 4, verse 17, she has a baby in her arms. And she's no longer empty but full. Because God has designed his image bearers for a magnificent cause. Now maybe it's sufficient that God allows a grandmother to hold a brand new baby in a Judean village, and that be good. And it was good. But see, I believe it goes deeper and further than that. What God was really doing was preparing a people for a king. Remember, they're in the days without a king, but there's one coming. He'll be of the line of David. Did you catch that? Of the lineage of David. This baby that Naomi holds is named Obed. Obed will have a son named Jesse. And Jesse will have a son named David. You see, Naomi's story points to David. David points to Jesus. Jesus points to resurrection. My Bible says there will be a day where death will be no more. There will be no more mourning, nor crying, or pain, for the former things have passed away. Can I tell you this morning? The best is yet to come. You go, but it's dark. It's so dark. Can I tell you something else? God works the night shift. And it won't be dark always, because joy will come in the morning. And when you and I can learn to worship in the dark, you'll go from bitterness to blessing. I was sinking deep in sin, far from a peaceful shore. Very deeply stained within, sinking to rise. No more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, and from the waters lifted me. Now safe. Now safe am I. You know the chorus? Love lifted me. Love lifted me. And when nothing else could help, love lifts me. Church, learn how to worship in the dark. Because God works the night shift. And you're never abandoned and you're never alone. He draws near to the brokenhearted. He binds up our wounds. And you may feel like you've gone away full and brought back empty. God's planned you for a magnificent cause. Watch him work. Jesus, for your glory and our good, would you have your divine way? In Jesus' name I pray, amen.